BT's Body and Balance is sponsored by Canada Diagnostic Centres, offering MRI, X-ray, and ultrasound services in Calgary and Okotoks.
Tourette syndrome is more common than most of us realize, and it's a little different than is often portrayed in the movies. Our health specialist Leah Sarich is here now to help us understand the disorder a little bit better.
Right, so let's start at the beginning. Tourette syndrome is a neurological disorder. It basically causes people to make involuntary sounds and movements, and those are called tics. So what I want to do is I want to introduce you to Steve Cole. That's Steve right there, and he's experiencing some pretty severe ticking right there. He wanted me to show this video to everyone because he has no control over what he's doing right now.
Wow.
None at all. And this can go on for a few minutes. It can go on for a few hours in some really severe cases, but this didn't last too long, but you can see he's just kind of trying to get through it. And that was his neurologist there, Dr. Tamara Pringsheim. Basically, Steve explains what it's like to have such intense tics.
Your brain is the driver of the car and you're the passenger. And so sometimes what happens with your body is sometimes you're very relaxed, and sometimes you'll even fall asleep while the drive is going on, and other times you're screaming in fear because your body's just moving in so many different ways and making sounds that you're watching things happen as opposed to being an active participant.
He says you're a lot like a puppet to your brain. And so Steve is actually on the very severe end of the spectrum, though. And this is the real thing they wanted to get across. His neurologist there, Dr. Pringsheim, says most people she sees for Tourette syndrome don't even require treatment. So Tourette syndrome is actually very common. About 25% of preschool children will have some kind of simple tic. The most common physical tic is blinking. The most common vocal tic is sniffing or throat clearing. But to get an actual diagnosis, you must have multiple motor tics and at least one vocal tic. Symptoms also need to last for about 1 year. And again, it's quite common. It affects 1 in 100 boys and 1 in 400 girls. But Dr. Pringsheim says in about 70% of cases, 70%, so that's a lot, these tics that occur in the childhood will actually remit naturally, which means they'll sort of go away as the brain grows and develops. So they'll actually just fade away right on their own. But she does say that Dr. Pringsheim says that all families really need education and support while they're going through this process. But only about 20% of those families will actually require some form of medication or behavioral therapy. For that other small percentage of patients like Steve, for example, and his tics did not go away, very obviously, if they're really severe, you know, there are medications that can suppress the tics, but of course those medications have side effects. So for Steve, he tried all kinds of different medications and decided for himself that he was not going to take medications and just deal with the tics as they come. But both Steve and Dr. Pringsheim really want people to understand that most Tourette's is not like Steve's.
Often when people hear the term Tourette syndrome, they equate it to something very stereotyped that you see in a movie, sort of a caricature of somebody who has Tourette syndrome, rather than it being the typical case. I mean, most people who come to see me are only mildly affected. I'd say that would be the norm, to have a number of tics that are present, but not the very aggressive vocal tics that you would see in a movie. And so there's really been a false portrayal.
So that's why we want to raise a little awareness about this. So what we're talking about is their Trek for Tourette, which is happening this weekend, which is great. This is an opportunity to really raise some awareness, raise some funds, build a sense of community for those with Tourette's and their families. Here's the information. It's on Sunday at Confederation Park. It goes from 9 a.m. until noon. And of course, you can go to my blog for a link to all kinds of information on that.
And that you can find at breakfasttelevision.ca. Wow, quite the learning lesson.
Isn't it, though? Yeah, it's just not like how it's portrayed in the movies.
Fascinating, and disease that is, or a disorder that is difficult to deal with, so you can help support, of course.